Hey, it's Adrian Huang, and today I have 10 less common music production tricks or techniques for you. I don't even use these all that often, but when I do, I find they really work, and I'm sharing them because I'm hoping that this will help inspire you to think outside the box in your own productions, or, you know, if you just want to straight up steal these exact ideas and use them, please do. So everything I'm showing you today is from my new record, Ganglia, and by the way, all of the revenue from this album is going to coronavirus relief work. We are living in a really crazy time right now. I hope you are all safe and good at home. I'm doing a lot of music stuff in my social isolation, which is really not that different from normal, but I'm very fortunate and grateful to be in a position where I can give back right now. So look up Ganglia on whatever music platform you use, and streaming it or downloading it will buy medical supplies. On Bandcamp, it's also set to pay what you want, and I will be matching any contributions that come through that page by the end of the month. So here we go, 10 weird techniques. I'll play a little bit of music demonstrating each one along with whatever name I decide to give the technique, and then I will explain exactly what's going on with it. In music production, when you talk about quantization, often you're referring to quantizing time. So if you played something a little bit offbeat, you can apply quantization and it'll snap things perfectly to the grid. In this case though, I'm talking about pitch quantization. So for example, you could play random notes and have them get rounded to the nearest note in a scale. Ableton has a MIDI effect for this, it's called scale. And what this does is let you change what is highlighted on this grid. Incoming notes, I think on the x-axis, get transferred to another note that you set on the y-axis. So for instance, if I did this, it would mean that every note that I play is a C, other than B's, which become D. This can also be really fun if you combine it with an arpeggiator. In the track that we're looking at, I actually took a slightly different approach though, and I used Ableton's random device. This one's a little more opaque, but I kind of like it because it's a bit more fun to just kind of jam with. So you can set what chance that a note that comes in is going to be changed. I have it pretty high here. You can set the amount of choices, and then you can set a scale. And I actually don't even know what the scale I'm working with is because they're just numbered here. But you just kind of dial around and see if you hear something that you like. If you want to, of course, you could look up the documentation and see what those are. But so here I've got this MIDI clip just playing C's, and I've got it going through the randomizer and triggering phase plant, and it came out with this cool diminished flavor. So because it's randomizing, that's gonna play differently every time. So something that I do when I've got it in a place that I'm happy with is set up a new MIDI track and route the input to the previous MIDI track, and then I can record it. And now in the new MIDI track, I have all of the actual note data from that performance. Bonus tip, you can set the BPM to the maximum and then record that all really quickly. In my case too, I also went through and edited the notes after that. I changed some that I felt like could be more interesting in different ways. Some gave me the starts of ideas that I then built on to create more deliberate phrases. What I like about it is if you don't have any music theory knowledge, you can just do this and get really interesting musical results. If you do have music theory knowledge, it kind of forces you to get out of your usual habits and just use your ears and decide what's interesting to you and then build on it from there. So I really like this as a way to come up with stuff that I otherwise wouldn't have and often get pleasantly surprised. So here I've got some really basic drums happening. But I wanted this part to have a lot of dynamics and interest and kind of glitchiness. So I went pretty extreme with this, but you don't have to, you know, just dial in as much as you want. But here, let me play it for you with the effects on it. So I've got 3 effects on here. It's Erosion, which is a stock Ableton plugin. It's Unfiltered Audio's Biome, and it's Bitspeak from Sonic Charge. And as you can see, all of these parameters are getting modulated tons and tons. I'm using the Max for Live LFO device for most of that, but Biome is pretty cool because it has built-in modulators. So basically, sort of at random, but with rates and ranges that I've dialed in to taste, certain parameters are being modulated so that the sound is always kind of changing. And for this type of track, I found this more interesting as a layer on top of some more normal, consistent drums, just to keep things really alive and moving. So the final trick from this particular track, which is called Wire Skip, is kind of building on what we just talked about, but it's using effects that are heavily modulated to create a new part to a piece. So there's a quieter section to the music where I had this kind of bell melody come in. Now, because this part of the track is so sparse, I didn't really have anything keeping time, but I didn't really want to just add a new instrument specifically for keeping time, so I thought I'd use some time-based effects to keep the pulse kind of going, but I also didn't want to just do a very basic, predictable delay. So I threw a delay on this send that I also, just experimented with this huge long effects chain to kind of create something with a lot of movement to it. And again, that's done through automating a lot of parameters. So we've got a transient master, that's adding some attack to the sound before it goes through the rest of the chain. This auto filter has frequency and resonance being modulated. And I just drew this in by hand, like completely randomly like this. Sometimes I'll highlight it and do a simplify envelope, just to make sure there's no little like jittery bits in there, although Ableton seems to do a pretty good job anyway in version 10. Put that through a little bit of bit reduction, EQ'd it, and then comes the delay, just doing 16th notes. Another filter after that with a whole different set of modulated parameters. Then I had this auto pan on just to like chop everything up to these 16ths so that it wasn't like the delay really ringing out on itself, but you still had that very accented rhythmic feel. OTT to compress and really bring up the volume of all the little details. A little auto pan doing some actual panning, just swirling everything around your head. Another delay, Valhalla delay, EQing again to get it sitting in the mix, and then a Valhalla vintage verb on the end of the chain. So this was a chain that I just played with for a really long time, trying to find something that would be related to my original sound, but create something new out of it for that specific purpose of having more rhythm in this section of the track. I've talked about this trick in a couple of videos, the radiator video, also the auto harp video, which is where this track is from. In that video, I tuned the auto harp to an open chord and then just hit the strings rhythmically. And then after that, I retimed some of the recording using Ableton's warp feature. You can see all these warp markers along here. Firstly, I just highlighted everything, and then I did Command-Shift-U, which opens up the quantize menu. I would probably set it to 116th notes. And then afterwards, if there was anything that I wanted to quantize further, I could go in and move those transients around. It leads to these perfectly on the grid transients. So with this type of music that's a bit more complex and highly rhythmic, having that precision can be really helpful. It's also fun experimenting with Ableton's warp settings, because here you can preserve different divisions of time, or I like to set it to transients, and then there's these playback modes where it'll loop forward and backwards, or it'll just loop forwards, or it will just play and then stop, and this number can determine how much of a decay there is. Honestly, these controls are like a whole world in themselves to explore, and they're really interesting on all different kinds of material. This next tip is also on the auto harp track, and it's something I did to add a whole bunch of interesting and dynamic spaciousness to one part of the track where I felt like atmosphere is what was needed. Basically, I set up a whole bunch of send tracks and put a different time-based effect on each one. Mostly they were delays, but like all different flavors of them. And if you don't have a whole lot of different plugins for this, you could just use very different settings on the same plugin. But let's see, we've got Ableton stock reverb, Ableton's grain delay with a bit of an extra chain after it, Waves H delay, Valhalla delay, and Ableton's echo. Now if we go up to this auto harp track, you can see each of these sends is applying just for like 1 or 2 moments throughout the whole track. So I'll play you this section and you can see how these delay sends move, and also if you look at the send tracks, you can see their levels here. This started with me just dumping random reverb and delay plugins on the sends, but then I fine-tuned them as I decided in each moment what I felt like hearing. So just something to keep in mind, and something that we're afforded so easily with modern music workstations. You can just have an effect do one thing for one moment in a song, and that can add a lot to it. This track is particularly experimental. It doesn't really have a set rhythm. I just wanted to kind of take wonky to the extremes. But something interesting about music with a lot of randomness to it is that if you reinforce certain things, they can feel more intentional. So something that I did in this track was take certain drum hits and accent them with little snippets. I actually sampled a couple of TED Talks. So every time one of the main drum hits happens, there's also this little randomized voice snippet. How I did that was taking some of the drum tracks, so for instance this one, and if I control click and then choose convert drums to new MIDI track, that generates this little guy, and it tries to make a hi-hat, a snare, and a kick based on the audio information that you get there. So I probably deleted the hi-hat track, maybe the snare as well. You can see the ones that I ended up using up here. These are triggering these slices of this TED Talk. And this MIDI's been recorded out, the notes are all over the place, but I was using a randomizer effect, kind of like I showed in that previous tip. So the randomizer would be selecting different slices of this TED Talk in time with the drums. Again, completely wacky rhythms on my particular track, but this could be something fun when you're using even more normal rhythms. Anytime you have some audio where you want to get MIDI to also be triggering on the biggest kind of accents. We're starting to get real outside the box now. The clip that you just heard was an experiment that I did where I was trying to create this kind of, again, rhythmically weird and also kind of glitchy textural piece. I actually don't have the project file anymore because I did this over 10 years ago, and you know, hard drive crashes happen. Basically, I had this one track with a chord sample and one track with a drum loop. Pretend these are my 2 tracks. I took different parts of my audio and I selected all these clips, and then I went down here to this little L to these launch modes. And under follow actions here, you can choose what will happen after a clip stops playing. So you could have everything stop, you could have it play again, you could go to the previous clip, the next clip, the first one in the series, the last one, any at all, or any other than the one that just played. So I'm pretty sure I put it to any, meaning that as these clips play, they just kind of jump around randomly. Now, the extra weird part about making this track was that I did major automation on the master tempo of the track. Just literally grabbed this while I was recording and moved it all around. Actually, you can hear I started it at, I think, the maximum value, and then I slowly brought it down. So it starts as this kind of like buzzy tone because everything's triggering so fast, and then it slowly opens up into something, well, that's still kind of weird and crazy, but a little bit more musical, I guess. So definitely a weird one, but I'm just always trying to find these new ways of coming up with unexpected rhythms and shapes in my music. This track called Discs is even older than the last one. I think I did this about 15 years ago, and it was in my kind of noise music concrete phase, and it was made using a couple layers of guitar pickups recording Discmen? people. Remember back in the day when you had CDs and there were these little portable CD players? Well, I discovered that they generated a lot of electromagnetic signals and you could pick those signals up kind of crudely through a guitar pickup. So I remember I had my electric guitar lying down on the floor. I put the Discman on top of it and I was just pressing start and stop and skip track and whatever different buttons I could because every different thing made slightly different sounds. You can also sometimes hear the guitar strings move. I think on one of the tracks I also put the resulting signal through some pedals, like there's a bit of distortion and delay. At any rate, a really fun way to get some really interesting sounds. I think now I would try to use those sounds in a different way, but back then I was just really all about this like formless, rhythmless, harmony and melodyless noise music. And you know, I'll still listen back to that piece and enjoy it. It's been sitting around 15 years and I still wanted to release it because it's got all these interesting textures and gestures and yeah, I like these sounds and you just don't really hear anything like that too often. By the way, if you find any of these tips helpful, I do run an online music production class. It covers my entire end-to-end process of creating original music, everything from starting and fleshing out an idea all the way through to mixing and mastering. You can get more info on that or sign up at learnmonthly.com/Andrew. It only runs a few times a year and we are in an enrollment period right now until March 28th, but if it's not currently enrolling, you can also sign up to join the waiting list there for the next time. Okay, my last two tips are modular tips, and they can be replicated in other ways if you're not into modular, but it is kind of modular doing what modular doing what modular does best. The clip I just played you is from the finally finished and released track from my Rainmaker video where I had the Moog Mother 32 playing the melody. And this technique is also about melodic randomization, but in a different way from the way we talked about before. I had a set sequence in the Mother 32. I think it was something weird like 13 or 17 steps long, but I had a very randomized rhythm triggering it. It was not firing with any consistency. It was just like, here's a few 16th notes, then we won't have a few, and then we'll have a few again. But with each of those triggers, it would cycle to the next note in the Mother 32's sequence. So you have this sense of a melodic flavor, but it never actually repeats the same way twice. Or if it did, it would be a complete fluke. Again, it's just another way to keep things alive and dynamic rather than super repetitive, and you don't have to use it in this extreme of a way. Something that I do sometimes is use an odd numbered sequence as an arpeggio in the background of a track. So I think I did this on Yours. I've done this on a few of my songs where I have kind of an arpeggio in the background supporting the chords. I'll have a 5 or 6 or 9 step sequence that's going at a constant rate, but because the song is typically in 4/4, that arpeggio will kind of phase in and out with where exactly those notes land. So for a really quick example, what if we had like a 5-note descending scale thing, ba 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 ba, but you're playing that over a 4/4 beat, so it's so it creates this really nice syncopation, and as a background part, a lot of people aren't even paying attention to it, but it does keep it more interesting than if it was just a really repetitive 4-note sequence. This is Pamela's new workout. Fantastic module, one of my favorite modules, probably like the most functionality for something of its size. It's a rhythm generator and there's a lot of different ways that you can control what kind of rhythms it generates, but something really fun is that it has these 2 CV inputs and you can assign those to modulate the timings of those rhythms. So on my track Ganglia, I had that happening on some hi-hats and some other little background percussive noises, and at the same time, I was using another signal to modulate the pitch of those samples randomly. So they kind of drift on and off the grid. Sometimes you feel like you can count along with them better than others, but they create this textural fill layer in between the much more solid kicks and snares, which are fully anchored to the grid. And another thing I did to help with the palatability of this trick was that I think at a regular interval, like maybe every quarter note or something, that is when I triggered the rhythms to change. So there wouldn't be something going on for too constant of a time, but also it wouldn't be changing so rapidly that it just seemed crazy and random. It's like just the right amount of crazy and random. for me anyway. I don't know. I feel like probably a lot of people won't like this music. I don't know. Do you like it? It's some of my favorite stuff, so there must be other people out there who enjoy it too, right? All right, team, it's been a pleasure. Reminder, Ganglia is out now, and all the revenue from that is going to COVID-19 relief work, so go stream it, download it. If you get it on Bandcamp, I'll be matching all the contributions that come in by the end of March. So yeah, check that out. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. I didn't do him.